When a Man Loves Two Women is the 21st episode of the 6th season of Frasier. This is directed by David Lee, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. I will go through things chronologically, and in general, I really thoroughly enjoyed this one. It starts off with Martin wanting fried eggs and bacon for his breakfast, so Daphne hands him a bowl of bran flakes, and Eddie jumps up to get some toast, and it's a very busy but pleasant atmosphere. And it turns out that Frasier had a date that night, and she's still there. This is Cassandra. Cassandra is played by Virginia Madsen. And Niles then comes over for squash, and everything seems like a really pleasant experience. Not for Niles, because Frasier has to pass on squash, but it's a nice start. Rose mentions that Alice's first birthday is coming up, which is absolutely ridiculous how quickly the time has gone. And then Faye is there. Faye, of course, being a former flame of Frasier's, played by Amy Brenneman. And Ross said that she was just leaving, so Faye could stay and have coffee with Frasier. And initially, Frasier had said to Ross, when Faye wasn't in earshot, that he can't have coffee with her, he's dating Cassandra. But Ross mentioned that Frasier never told Cassandra they were exclusive. They are just dating. So what's the problem? And I will say, I don't think there's any problem with having coffee with somebody. It's all about intentions. But at the same time, I am with Frasier on this one. I am the kind of person who only ever wants to date one person at a time. But I don't think there's anything wrong with dating multiple people. But I think also if you've progressed to sleeping with somebody, then maybe you should at least be open and honest about this. So I understand why Frasier was considering this not appropriate. But as I said, it's just coffee. What's the worst that could happen? Well, in the next scene, we have another breakfast scene, beautifully choreographed fridge dance with Martin and Daphne. Eddie gets more toast, and then Faye is there. So things did progress past coffee for Frasier. And it gets very awkward and quite delightful because Cassandra comes over. And Niles then comes over, and obviously Faye and Cassandra don't know each other is there. And Martin is so gleeful. He is absolutely loving this, and his expressions were just such a joy to watch. And once everybody's left, Frasier has to make a decision. He realizes he can't carry on with this, so he needs to decide, does he want to be with Cassandra or does he want to be with Faye? And honestly, I feel like it maybe feels a little unrealistic because he's just bumped into Faye after quite a while, but he's been dating Cassandra. So it doesn't, to me, the Faye incident just seems like it was a one-time thing, but now he feels like he has to decide between them, even though it's not as if he's been caught up on Faye or anything. So it feels a little unbelievable, but nevertheless, it's good fun. And Niles had an interesting point to make because Frasier was going to let the coin decide. Heads it's one of them, tails it's the other. Niles flips the coin, and he says to Frasier that Frasier wanted Niles to say that it was one name more than the other. I think that that's the great thing about choosing with the flip of a coin, not because letting a coin decide is a good idea, but because if it's a certain outcome and you feel disappointed, that then tells you that actually you were looking for a certain answer. And I think that that's pretty interesting, and Frasier realizes that he's made a decision. We then have another breakfast, but it's out of whack because the yellow bowl broke, so Martin has to have his breakfast out of a red bowl. Daphne then gets a yellow bowl from Eddie, and it turns out that Faye is there. Frasier had chosen Cassandra in the previous scene. So why is Faye there now? Well, it seems like things are just not going according to Frasier's plan. And one of my favourite moments in the entire episode is when, yet again, Niles has arrived to play squash. This is, I think, the third time. And he walks in the door, said, "Morning all," and then immediately realises Faye is there and says, "Oh, forget it," and just walks out. He realises this is just not happening. They're not playing squash because Frasier's playing games. And I rather liked it quite a lot. And we're then down at Cafe Nervosa, and Frasier is actually going to break up with Cassandra and tell her the relationship is no more. And she thinks Frasier is actually going to talk about making a commitment, and she mentions that she'd been seeing somebody else. And that's when Frasier realizes, no, I want us to make a commitment. He hasn't even mentioned breaking up to her yet, but the jealousy of anybody else dating her meant that his mission of breaking up with her was no more. he now had to date her because somebody else was dating her. And he wants them to be exclusive. And Niles' face, he's over at the counter in Cafe Nervosa, and his face when he sees that Frasier hasn't broken up with her, it's just an absolute treat. Basically, everybody else in this is just rolling their eyes at Frasier because he's just going back and forth so much, and I found it to be rather enjoyable. Frasier, when Cassandra is not in the room, he calls Faye and leaves her a message saying, "We need to talk." And Niles said at the end, "I'll see you for squash tomorrow," which is probably not going to happen. And then Cassandra comes back into the room, and all of a sudden, we hear Frasier's internal monologue, as he starts to realise all of these things about Cassandra that he actually doesn't like. She's wearing too much makeup, and he now has to see her every day and at work, and it's going to be constant. And he's also comparing her to Faye, in his mind, of course. And I feel like he instantly regrets his decision. And I'd forgotten how this played out. And I feel like they missed an opportunity. And I think they could have taken a different direction with this. And I think it would have been a more important message. But also, I don't like the ending of the episode. I just think it kind of fizzled out a little bit. It just wasn't a great ending. The penultimate scene is Frasier going to talk with Faye. And Faye had worried because when Frasier had called her and left her a message and said, "We need to talk," Faye had, understandably, thought, "Oh, this must mean we're breaking up." So when Frasier came over and said he wants to be exclusive with her, she was relieved. But they missed an opportunity. And I think this would have been a more powerful ending, but also because I don't like this ending, I'm just looking for something that would have been better. Ultimately, what happens is they're exclusive, and then Frasier begins to have all of these doubts with his internal monologue, and then Faye has a similar experience. But what I think should have happened is that because Frasier had left that message to Faye, maybe Faye had also been dating somebody else, and she'd heard Frasier's message and thought, well, that's over, so I'm going to ask my other date to be exclusive. And thereby showing that because Frasier had messed around so much and had given people mixed messages, he's now got nobody. He's not with Cassandra, and he's not with Faye, because neither of those worked out, because he kept struggling to make a decision. And I think it would have been a much stronger message, and I think ultimately it would have been a much better ending. But the ending that we got was just a little bit flat, so I didn't like the ending. And for me, that alternative would have been better. But nevertheless, the actual last scene is great, as Eddie is not eating, so Daphne goes to get the yellow bowl from Martin, who is busy having his breakfast in it, and gives it to Eddie. Although she rinses the bowl under the sink, fair enough, because it had Martin's breakfast in, but then just puts it down in front of Eddie, without tipping the food from the red bowl into it. So Eddie's just got an empty bowl now. So that was a bit of an oversight. I think I'm reading too much into it. But we had a lot of Eddie in this. Absolutely adorable. In general, I liked the episode. I think for me, the highlights come from Martin's facial expression, just Niles in general. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. The conclusion wasn't what I wanted it to be, nor did I actually find the conclusion to be that satisfying. It just fell flat a little bit. But that aside, it's a good episode, and at the end of the day, it's not one I'm going to skip. I still rather enjoyed it. When a Man Loves Two Women is definitely a decent episode of Frasier.